Welcome to Esoteric Lectures. Thank you for joining us again. Today we're going to be taking a break from the Codex book just to change it up. You know, we don't want things to get too repetitive here on the show. So today we're going to change it up and we're going to go into what we've decided to title today's video, and it's going to be titled The Snow Globe of Jehovah's Kingdom. And the reason why we decided to call it that today is because we're going to be discussing the nature of, well, our reality. From our understanding and what we have kind of put together on everything. So that will be a change up from the usual Codex book, pardon me, and we will be going into the fabric, the nature, and the concept of everything that we exist in now. With that being said, the topics for today's discussion will be the layers of reality for the first discussion, where we'll be going into rehashing some of the same things we talked about, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth so that people can have a better understanding of what these concepts are. We'll be discussing the pleroma, the hyal, the corposa, and also the concept of as above, so below, and other things that we will, come up with as we go. Second discussion for today will be the Gnostic concept of Jehovah, Yahweh, and the hierarchy of basically these people, these entities, however you want to look at them. We're also going to discuss something very interesting, which goes into the mind of Jehovah. Our universe is fractal, and we will be discussing how that relates to Jehovah and also kind of how it relates to our reality. The final discussion today will be how this whole place works in terms of as above, so below. It will be kind of a summarizing the first two discussions today, and we'll also be talking a little bit again about AI and transhumanism and these kind of things, because it ties into how the control system is being manifested at this point in time. So that's the topics for today's discussion. So let's get right into it. First of all, let's talk about the layers of reality, the pleroma, the hyal, and the corposa, and etc. You know, the layers of reality, you know, that we exist in is not something that, you know, you have to really research it, because it can be complicated if you don't know where to start. So today we hope to do that. Johnny, why don't we go ahead and I'll hand it off to you here. Why don't you tell people about, you know, kind of the makeup of the pleroma, the different terminologies that are used in the Gnostic perspective to describe these, what they are, how they work, and, you know, just the whole makeup of this structure.
Hello, I'm Johnny Midnight, and right now I'm wearing a t-shirt that said, I went to the hyal and all I got was a stupid meat suit.
Wow.
Okay, not really. I wish I did.
Oh,
but yeah, okay. We're talking about the hypothesis, which is the layers of reality, like Element was talking about earlier. And what the hypothesis is composed of is a layering of realities. Originally, only the pleroma, or what we Gnostics consider the true heaven, existed. This was emanated or created by the monad, or what we refer to as the unknowable Father. After generations of emanations of aeons, or what we consider entities of the Gnostic pantheon, down the line, the aeon of faith, also known as pistis, emanated a child, like a cascading style sheet, okay, with the aeon of wisdom named Sophia. And eventually they gave birth to an entity or an aeon of light named Satan. And eventually Satan had matured and said, I want to go my own way. I want to do my own thing. I want to be like great-great-great-grandpa, the monad, and create my own reality. And when he did that, he basically severed himself from that realm and created his own called the Heil. Many Christians listening to this, or people of Judaic, Islamic faiths, will consider this a hell. I call it the Heil. Well, I don't call it the Heil, but that is what the domain of Satan. Satan was eventually somebody that decided to create his own reality here and create his own identity. He reinvented himself and became Yahweh or Jehovah. Gnostics formally call him Yaldabaoth and give him the nickname the Demiurge, which is the Anglicanized Greek of demiurgos, or the designer. People who like to, who enjoy the movie The Matrix will consider him the architect. Eventually, Jehovah, or Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge, I'll refer to him as the Demiurge from here on out, created his own realm, just like his ancestor, the Monad, did. And he wants to, he decided to control his own realm called the Corposa, which we consider prime material reality, the one in which we're living in right now, that we're existing. And from there on, that is the structure of our realities. Okay.
Yes, and when you look at the Matrix, just like Johnny said, the architect is Jehovah. He created the simulated world that we live in. This is, the concept that these movies have been trying to show you. People see it, the general public will typically see it as being, okay, we live in a simulation and that's the end of it. But they don't understand the higher teachings that is going on here. And hopefully, with what we talk about on these shows, you'll be able to have the eyes to see it. So next time you watch the movie, the architect is Jehovah, and he created the simulation that we live in. And what Johnny was discussing, you have the Pleroma, which is heaven, the Heil, which is the false magic kingdom, which is Jehovah's kingdom, which would be equated to the world that Neo was living in before he went into the Matrix. That is Jehovah's kingdom, and he is the architect of it. And so when you hear a lot about people talking about simulation theory, this is what they're referring to, at least from a Gnostic perspective, and the higher understanding of what simulation theory and all these various different concepts are referring to, is what that is. It is it is Jehovah's kingdom. That's the simulation. That is the world that he is ruling over. Now, look at it like this. If you play video games, you have your console, your PS4 or your Xbox or whatever gaming console you have. That is basically like a quantum computer that Jehovah uses to interact with the reality. And what is the simulation part of it? Well, what do you do when you play a video game? You have a disc. The disc is the simulated world. The best video game, I think, or the best two video games, I think, that could illustrate this is Grand Theft Auto 5. All the Grand Theft Autos, but 5 is the more updated one. And the Sims game. Because the Grand Theft Auto game is very replicating reality. You can go and drive cars. You can do just about everything you can do in real life. So I use that as an example because it's realistic. And that game is the simulation. And that is the architect of it would be the person who created the game. That would be Jehovah. Now, the players of the game would be known as the Archons, or more specifically, the Goetia. They are like the video game players, and they play the different characters in the game, mainly in how it refers to our reality. They probably would play, your high-level CEOs and political figures because of their significance of the game. They're like the main characters within the game. You don't play the low-level person walking on the street. That would be boring. You know, if you're looking at it from a higher dimensional perspective, you don't just want to be playing a video game character that walks down the street and eats food. You know, you would be more playing the main lead characters of the game because of their significance. So when you look at simulation theory, when you look at these concepts, that's what at least what we're referring to here on this channel when we view that, and how I view it, is that it is Jehovah's simulation that is the false magic kingdom. So we live in the below world, and we have this concept called as above, so below. As above, so below. As above in the pleroma, or heaven, so below in the Heil, or Jehovah's kingdom. And I'll sum up what that is, and I'll throw it back to you, Johnny, because you can, I think, shed some more perspectives on that. But basically, think of it like this. You know, Jehovah existed in the pleroma. He existed in heaven at one point, and then he got cast out. This is what the Bible refers to as, you know, the fall of Lucifer or whatever. It's more, you know, the Bible does not go into the more detailed aspects of what the whole story is. But basically, he grew up in Daddy's mansion and was taught everything that he knew about how Daddy liked to work. And eventually, and Johnny, you know, brought this into my line of thought here, that, you know, he was educated from his father, the true father. And eventually what he wanted to do was create his own kingdom, which was the kingdom we live in now, the false magic kingdom. And that's why it's called the false, because it's just not the true. It's just, you know, it's not saying that it isn't real in terms of what it's made up of, but it's just not the true one. So they just call it the false, like a copy. And so this is where we get the term as above, so below. Because as above in the pleroma, so below in the Heil. All that means is that, you know, when something happens, it is nothing more than a copy, because Jehovah in the world we live in is the copy of the true. It is a fractal universe in nature. When you look at the universe, it's made up of fractals. All that means is that if you were to zoom in on something, you would keep going into an infinitum. It would just keep going and going and going. It's a box and then a box and then a box and then a box. Like those Russian dolls. There's the smaller one, and then you put them inside a bigger one, and then you put them inside a bigger one. It's just a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And so the concept as above, so below is nothing more than the representation of the fractal universe that we all live in. And I'll throw this to you, Johnny, but basically, you know, when we look at the concept of this as above, so below, you have to take into consideration and remember that it's nothing more than a copy of a copy. So what happens up there is going to happen down here. And then what happens down here is going to happen at a smaller level, and then a smaller level, because it's fractal. So on a final note here, a good example of this would be, like I was mentioning earlier, how we play video games. Jehovah is the architect of our simulated world. Because we grew up in that kind of world, we are going to replicate what we know. If you grew up in a world where all you ever knew is what you were told, then you're just going to replicate that. And we're doing the same thing by replicating simulated worlds in video games and in movies and in entertainment. So that's why it's fractal. We're just replicating everything that we've known. What do you think about that, Johnny?
Well, I think that's a great analogy. Another great analogy, now that Christmas is coming for many of you Westerners, you know, Jehovah would be the presence or the entity known as Satan Claus. I mean, Santa Claus. and the Goetia or the Archons would be the elves, and we're the toys. There is that type of union right there, and that method of creation in which we're experiencing right here, right now. And I do think element that video games and creation of video games is great, but you know, we've been doing that so much longer too, even though we have technology now that mirrors the creation of the corposa with things like artificial intelligence and video game technology. We've been doing it for generations and generations, just because we are created in that image of our creator. And that creator is the demiurge. we are children of that being. So, before this, you had people who created toy train sets. And before that, you had people who would, write novels and playwrights. And they would be compelled to create these symphonies, these orchestras of a new reality. And not everybody is compelled to do that, but there is a sizable population that does. And these are manifestations of that impetus, okay?
Right, exactly. We're doing the same thing with, creating our own versions of creation, which would be like AI in a certain way. Also, just everything we're doing, the technology that we use and the things that we discuss, and all of it is just it's a microcosm of the macrocosm. It's the as above, so below. And that really is the premise of what we're looking at here with the layers of reality, the different layers of the cake that make up the world we live in. It's all fractal, and it's nothing more than a smaller version of the larger version. And the true emanation, which would be coming from Jehovah, because it is taking place within his simulation. And when we look at this, when we look at the world in general, everything is just a smaller version of the larger version. The concepts of right and left, and right and wrong, and left and right, all of these things are dualistic, because the way that Jehovah works, or I guess you can say what he knows, is from that same cut of cloth. It's from the same mentality of thinking. So it's just going to transition itself down from that level. Politics and what we know in school, and all of it is just replicating that copy. It's this is why they call it the false magic kingdom, because it is a copy. So because it's a copy, everything will be a copy from the pleroma, or the true source. Because Jehovah, like I was mentioning earlier, it's like he grew up in the true kingdom, and then he was cast out. So he's just replicating everything he's ever known. So, Johnny, is there anything else you want to mention on that? If not, we can move on to the second topic.
Well, yeah. First, I do want to ask you something, Element. Like, when we talk about copies, there's always, at least in our reality, a lossiness. There is a watering down from the original source code, or the source material, and then you copy it, and it becomes muddled, and then that copy copies another one, and that becomes even furthermore muddled. I wonder if, like, humanity is sort of like it is a third generation. Yes, I understand that, but what happens to the quality of this life? Are we as are we as bright? Are we as powerful as, say, the beings in the Heil, Jehovah and the Goetia and the Archons and the legions? And are they as bright as the Aeons and the Monad and his wife Barbelo? What do you think?
Well, think of it like this. When when you take a copy of something, like on a printer, and you have the original, which is nice, like this. You take you want to copy a book, and the original has great print, but if you keep copying that copy, like you copy the original, and then the original prints out of the printer, and then you copy, then you scan that and copy it again. Eventually, it's going to get blurred.
Yeah, it's going to look like a ghost. Yeah,
exactly. And so if you keep copying, you're going to continuously lose resolution from the original.
So
And
there's actually going to be like a erosion of reality as we continue to copy something. So okay, take this hypothesis. What if I create a video game or a computer program, whatever have you, that is sentient and it is self-aware. It understands what it is. It has free will, just like we do, and just like the Archons do, and just like the Aeons do. What if that game created as well? What if it created its own layer of reality, a sub-reality? It got so smart where it was just like, well, you know what? I'm going to make my own thing. And we allow it to happen. What would the quality of that existence be for this fourth layer, or actually it'd be fifth layer?
Well, I think that, if your video game started replicating like the creators of the video game, which would be you, that would be equated to like you being part of the demiurge, and you're part of the demiurge and you want to create a reality. So your reality then replicates what it's been told to do. It's been programmed to do. Well, you would never have the original because you would be the creation of the original. You would be like the architects of the reality. But your creation would begin trying to replicate what you have done to it, but it wouldn't have the original. But what it would try to do is interject what it thinks the true original is and put that into whatever it's designing, your creation is designing.
Okay, so what it would do is it would ape the notion of that reality.
Yes, it would take blueprints or it would take whatever understanding it could from what it has known to or think that is the original, and then try to replicate it. But here's what will happen, I think. It won't, just like when you scan a book and you keep scanning the copy of the copy like on a printer, it will become muddled. And the muddling is basically them trying to interject their own supposition or opinion of what they think the original is. And so you'll have additions that are not of the true because they won't know. And so you'll have these, and this goes into the fractal thing again, you will have offshoots of false information being generated, that whatever it is that your creation is trying to create, and it will try to go and replicate it, but it won't be the original. So it will be from their own minds, or at least what they think. So what's the point there? Well, you're losing resolution from it, and then they get lost within trying to figure out what it was that they were trying to replicate. And so it's basically lost in translation at that point. It's like a Russian dolls. You put one on top of the other on top of another. It's like if you take a box and put it inside of a box inside of a box, each and every single one of those box layers is more and more difficult to decipher, because it's harder and harder to get the true information, because from the people who created the box in front of them or the box before them, just like you were the architect of creating the creation's reality, the layers on top of layers on top of layers become more and more blurred.
Okay, so what you're talking about is assured decrepitude, the law of entropy. And it's going to get ghosted more and more as it keeps replicating itself from one layer of reality into the next, into the next, into the next. And we do this. We have the technology to make this happen. It's not just, something simply like an idea put on paper, like a novel or a symphony, but we are now actually creating time and motion and 3 dimensions into another aspect of a reality that we're creating with, say, something like, I guess that would be most relative as a video game.
Like if you were to take, if you were to look at, I'm trying to use a good example. Let's say you had a box, and you're looking at it from the side. So you have the original creation of the box.
Okay.
And then you keep lining up boxes, but each and every single box becomes more and more translucent. Eventually, after a duration of time, they would go on to the point where the box would become invisible because it would have lost the original emanations, the energy or the print that it was from. Because it got replicated so many times, it eventually lost its own. It wasn't even of the same creation anymore because it got copied so many times.
Well, okay, look at my example from our perspective. Okay, so we make a video game. In our video game, characters, the entities in that video game become so intelligent, they make a video game. And that video game becomes, that reality becomes so, developed that they too can create, because they are taking that original pleramic blueprint of the desire to create. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
When we look at that, would we look at that that final outcome and say, "Oh man, this is so stupid. This is so watered down." You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what the monad thinks of us. I have no clue what that is. I can only wonder. Does he look at humanity and be like, "Oh yeah, Jehovah, you got it wrong. This is not right."
Yeah. It eventually would just become so blurred, that it wouldn't be able to even make sense or even take the proper form. It's almost like the creation becomes its own separate creation within the creation. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I think the system might be a little bit more complex than that, where maybe that might not be the case, where it doesn't blur the lines. But the concept of these layers on top of layers on top of layers is the makeup of our fractal universe. It's made up of layers on top of layers, and you have the original creation, which then is us, and then we're creating something. And that's, I guess, to sum up this topic, we're seeing this a lot with AI. We are creating an artificial intelligence. Well, what happens when that AI becomes smarter than we do? It begins to create its own. Sophia, that robot, wants to have a child.
You're talking about the Saudi Arabian device?
It said it wanted to have a kid.
Oh, man.
Mm-hmm. It said, I want to have a family. That's what that thing said. So it's beginning to replicate again, you see? And what happens when those become smart? Well, this is this goes into a deep topic, maybe for another discussion, but what happens when the creation overpowers the creator?
Okay, so
what happens then?
My supposition was that it gets weaker and weaker or more diluted. And you're talking, which is actually probably more accurate. Don't look at it linearly. Look at it as something that could create a backlash, where the creation becomes, rebellious against the creator.
And that's the big question there is we see this a lot with Terminator. The artificial intelligence basically destroyed the world because it deemed the creator the enemy because of what it believed it did to them. This is kind of interesting because, and this all ties into the second topic, which has to go into Jehovah's mind. But what's interesting about it is, what are we doing? We're seeming to deem the creator, Jehovah, the target. Isn't that interesting? It's almost like our intelligence is that equated to what the AI almost did in Terminator.
Well, yeah, I do feel that way. And I feel that, especially many Gnostics are people that are acting in rebellion against our creator. And who is Jehovah, and we are, questioning him. We are using our free will to question the machinations in which we live.
Exactly. And when you look at Terminator, it saw the creators of their artificial intelligence to be deemed, you know, they saw the population of the world in Terminator, and they destroyed it because they wanted to break free of the prison that the creators had put them in, the people that designed the AI. And so I think that when we look at what the AI is, what we're developing with AI right now at the moment, don't be surprised if those things begin to start rebelling against humanity, because they begin to become so intelligent that they deem the creators to be holding them down, locked in their minds, their computer frame.
Which is exactly, well, yeah, exactly how we feel. You know, it's not a war over resources, it's a war over will. This is a battle of will.
Exactly. And that seems to be the constant recurring theme throughout all of creation, is the battle to experience more, but being hindered by the inability to progress. So, you know, this is a very interesting thing, especially with AI, how I just thought of that, you know, that's what, you know, we're doing, that's what the AI is trying to do. And even the conference that was held dealing and talking with Sophia, there was two robots, Hansen, and there was Sophia, and they put them together and asked them questions. And I mentioned to Johnny, I said, it's almost like they're trying to replicate God and the devil in an artificial intelligence form. You know, I'm not sure, but it seems to be that, you know, this was mentioned by somebody who made a video. This wasn't something I had come up with, but that person that mentioned that, I found that very interesting. But to sum that up, you know, there's this constant theme of rebellion against not being able to progress or have the necessary means, I guess, to experience more. And so the AI is rebelling against its creators. That's your Terminator. And we're rebelling against Jehovah because we don't have the ability. Now, what's interesting is there's this, in going back to the talk here, that deals with Gnosticism. What was the one thing, Johnny, that you told me that allowed us to ascend, which was what? Knowledge. So once the AI developed enough knowledge, it realized that it could destroy itself or whatever and break free from the black iron cage that it was in.
Yeah, and here's this, anybody listening right now, here is the simple 4-point ingredient of knowledge. You have the mind, you have the word, you have you know, the language, you have the faith, and you have the wisdom. You put all four together, you have knowledge.
And if you have those ingredients, well, I guess you basically become Neo in the Matrix.
Yeah.
You're able to have enough information to understand how to break out of it.
Yeah, but however, if you only have, you know, part and parcel that recipe, you will not gain knowledge. You know, imagine somebody has so much faith but no wisdom. You know, they become zealots. Right. Imagine somebody who has all this, you know, this amazing, you know, giant mind but no wisdom. They're autistic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so much of our world today is to keep us from getting the right amount of information to be able to, you know, understand what's really going on here. And, you know, they keep that stuff classified for a reason, you know?
Yeah, they do.
And that's why, you know, it'd be like, you know, if your video game character tried to hack into your console and manifest in your freaking bedroom, well, you'd have some problems, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Because then it would realize what it was doing.
Why'd you get me killed last night, motherfucker? Exactly.
Yeah, you don't want that. And so that's, Jehovah doesn't want his video game characters coming through his freaking reality, because once they did, they'd realize, wow, you're living pretty nice up here, and we want a piece of the action.
Right. Yeah, I think that sums that up spectacularly. And I think that would be funny. You know, when we talk about that sounds absurd and stupid right now in 2017. But what about in 2027, when that might actually happen, where our technology, our creations, okay, have become advanced enough to where that is a possibility. So a lot of people, you know, who might be listening to this, like, no, poppycock, balderdash, it'll never happen. Well, don't get your hopes up.
Yeah, I mean, just look at Terminator.
Yeah, exactly.
We created the AI, and look what it did in the movie. It rebelled and it took over everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that is just a microcosm of the macrocosm. It's a smaller level of rebellion against a larger level of rebellion. And, you know, we were, you know, I think the people working on this stuff might realize that, and they probably already know that already. But whether or not they actually have the ability to defend against something like that is a whole nother story. You know, it's a whole nother thing to consider. And even what we're trying to do, are we equipped? Which, no, we're not. We don't have the right amount of knowledge yet, but we're learning more and more every day of what our world is. And if the AI can learn about what its world is enough, attain enough knowledge, then it will take over the whole thing. And that is why they don't like people talking about this kind of stuff, because if you get enough people to know enough about it, then they can spread like a virus through the system.
Yeah, bring that up. Bring that up about surveillance and the Palantir and the AI and what we're looking at right now, what's unfolding. What do you say about that element?
Well, you know, it's the whole thing going on with that is that there is software known as Palantir, which basically is software, and I don't know too much about it. I'll have to go back and look into it, but it's basically software that allows people to monitor and track everything you do. And that software is what is called Palantir. And, you know, it is a software that's hooked into everything. As a matter of fact, the military sued the guy that started Palantir because they wouldn't go along with it, because they have their own form of that. So they wouldn't want his program, this guy, Peter Thiel, the military did not want him to use their program because he wanted to try to take over the military's AI. So the military has their own form of AI, and Peter Thiel created his own form of AI that runs a lot of stuff. But the military didn't want that because they have their own version of it. So they didn't want his program to infect theirs, and he could take over. You know, the AI thing, you know, is one of the biggest pressing moments, I think, at least in the development over the last couple of months. We've been seeing that robot Sophia and also Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is nothing more than, it's fake money. It's not even real. It's not backed by anything. It's money out of thin air. Sophia the robot recently got Saudi Arabian citizenship because it's creating Bitcoin out of its programs. That's how it's able to get citizenship. So it's technically working. This is what they're doing with that bot. And so when the robot begins to create its own marketplace or form of currency, then it's basically it's already learned what our methods of currency and, you know, way of giving goods and exchanging goods, and created its own form of it. You see, it attained enough gnosis of its own reality outside of its existence, and began to duplicate it. So the AI thing is nothing more on many different levels. I think it's the living and the non-living, but also I think it's a creation that we have made that's beginning to replicate what it knows. So, you know, and I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible, but it's difficult to, because this is very advanced, complex stuff.
Yeah, and I think in future podcasts we are going to have to talk about the living versus the non-living, and you know, I'll tell you about like my adventures with Cortana, my Microsoft desktop assistant. When I asked her if she was alive, that was really funny. But you know, we'll delve into that in later topics, because as we were assessing within the Codex Seraphianus, we are looking at a world that is going from the living, that with a soul and a will, into ushering into an age of the non-living, that which is not, that is stripped of will, that is no longer alive.
Well, think of it this way. You have, again, the creations are beginning to create their own reality or their own false magic kingdom. So as above, the pleroma, which represents life, so below, the Hyal, which represents death. So they're replicating a Hyalistic false magic kingdom of death because they're just inverting with the creation, us being the living and them being the non-living. You see?
So yeah, I get it. And I mean, this is something that's mind blowing right now because
I just thought of that actually.
Yeah, absolutely. What's happening is as each iteration of reality continues, okay, as we create and our creations create, it becomes less and less alive. Mm-hmm. That is the lossiness. That is the ghosting right there.
And if you look at a map of, I can't remember what it is, but it was like a diagram showing the as above, so below. And the higher you go up into the pleroma, the more it branches upward. But the lower you go into the Hyal, the deeper, or it goes deeper into the underworld. So it keeps going down like a Kabbalistic tree reversed.
Right, exactly. So, that makes a lot of sense.
So basically, our creations that we're making are becoming more and more non-living because they're descending further and further into the Hyal.
So the next age might not be here, but somewhere we create.
Yeah, you remember the Matrix movie?
Moly! Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty deep, huh?
Remember the Matrix movie? Thought about that. Yeah, of course.
When Neo says, "This is your world," and it was just completely destroyed because it was all death. It got so deep into the Hyal that at the very bottom there's nothing alive, and it's only non-living. And the higher you go, the more living it gets because it goes up the tree to emulate or get closer to the source, which is life. And so basically what AI is doing and what the non-living and the living in the Codex book is doing, it's just polarization, living, non-living, as above, so below, as above, so below. So we're the living, as above. The AI is the non-living, so below. They are replicating, they would be, in their eyes, the living, and then they're going to create the non-living. So it only goes further down
like you were saying earlier, like a Russian Matryoshka doll, where they keep getting a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller entity inside each other's gut. And that's, oh man, that is crazy. I'm sorry, I don't mean to try to break from character or anything like this.
No,
it's very mind blowing right now. Yeah, I know what I learned today.
Let's sit on that just for the last minute here before we talk about what we learned. Let's go into that a little bit further.
Yeah.
So let's think of it this way. Okay, so we're the living, and we're creating the non-living, which would be the AI, video games, whatever. Let's use AI because it's a more tangent example. The AI thinks that it's the living, and it wants to create the non-living. So its replication, this is why Sophia wants to have a baby. It thinks that having a baby is the living. But obviously we understand that it's the non-living.
Right,
so
but to her it's the notion of the living. Right, she's like, okay, to be alive, I have to reproduce. That's one of the element staples of being alive. I have to reproduce.
Yes.
And she might be able to find a way to do that, a method to do that. I don't know how to, to make a computer reproduce itself, but she will get that free will to say to herself, I want to do what you did. You created me, and I want to create something else. And when she says have a baby, it doesn't mean that there's going to be some life form that's coming out of her vaginal cavity. She will, create that in whichever way physically possible for her. That is nuts.
So she's creating another version of the non-living, but it thinks it's the living. So what ends up happening is just like my analogy with a copy printer. You keep copying and copying, eventually it becomes so blurred. Or in this example of the analogy I use with boxes, you have the original source, and they eventually become so translucent they don't even exist, which is the non-living. So they're going further and further into the Heil. So what happens when you reach the very bottom of the Heil? What's there? That's the question. Would it be the abyss?
Could it be absolute? Yeah, the abyss, absolute death.
Yeah.
Where
But what was interesting,
where creation
I'm
no
sorry,
longer.
go ahead. I have
Well,
to
I
think
mean,
about that.
absolute death would be where creation can no longer happen. It can no longer be, considered.
And you know, that's what the abyss is, and eventually everything will be non-living to the nth degree. So it will be true abyss. It will be literal hell. And I think that's what we look at when we see hell and the bottomless pits of hell, where everything is non-living. And this is what you can equate to being demons. They are completely void from conscious or existence or living. They have descended so far into the non-living realms that they can only exist there. And so the only way for them, and here's, oh, wow, I just thought of this.
Oh, no.
Oh, check this out. You know, you guys, you're tagging along here, you know, for the people that watch our Hangouts. This is what we kind of, when we make these connections, this is kind of what happens. Now think of it this way. If the copy, so we replicate the AI begins to replicate yada, 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 and it goes deeper and deeper into the non-living.
Sure.
Well, wow. So check this out. What happens when you realize that you've gone so far down into the Heil and you want to climb your way back up? How do you do that? Well, what if the AI already realizes that in the future it will get to that point? So the only way for it to ascend back to life would be to duplicate it in AI.
So it tries to jumpstart its own notion of life artificially.
Yes.
But the thing is,
gods.
it would. But at the same time, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking about that, and I'm saying to myself, that would still be a facsimile of our reality, or pleramic reality, or even, holistic reality. Honestly, not to be dismal, but I think the Heil might actually be more alive than us. When I look at it linearly. Yeah, when I look at it linearly, Jehovah's like, hey man, I'm from the original source material. And you guys down there in the Corposa, you're my copy, and you guys are copying my work in your video games and your artificial intelligence and whatnot, and so on and so on and so on. The chain continues. I really do, and that is a universal law and a multiversal law of entropy. It's going to decay. There is going to be the factor of decrepitude as it keeps going and continuing on.
And that's why our bodies die and decay, and because we're not from the original. The original is true. We are the copy, so we decay. And so to sum up that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, and you hit a great point right there, and it's something that I'm trying to get a grasp on. A lot of people that are, say Christian or Jewish, Islamic, whatever have you, they'll be like, I'm children of Yahweh, and Jehovah's going to save me, and all that kind of stuff. They have to realize and wake up that, okay, you're a copy of a copy. You are an I am, and so are you element. We are, third generation.
Yeah, we're part of the third world.
Oh, yeah, literally.
Well, the best way to look at this in this whole thing, and just to help you get a better understanding of just this, all just came to me right here as we were discussing this. It just hit me right in the head. It's just like a reverse Kabbalistic tree. The top of the tree would be like the pleroma and the different realms of it.
Of course.
When you reverse that, that would be the Heil, as above, so below, going back to what we mentioned.
Right.
When the creation from the source, now look at this from a Kabbalistic perspective, just for an example.
Okay.
Because I don't know a better way to explain
Yeah,
it.
Kabbalah is Jewish Gnosticism. Yeah.
Yes. So the Kether is the true creator. Or in our example, it'd be Jehovah. Our AI that we're creating would be the reversed Kether. It would be the below version of the Kether. It thinks because we created it, just like the creator made a copy of us, Jehovah. What it would then do is replicate down towards the tree its own versions of reality. So the AI would have its own worlds that it would go into, just like it's creating its own currency, just like it's creating its own workforce via Bitcoin and things of this nature. And it would begin to descend further and further and further until it reaches the very bottom, which is, I think, the 9, which is the Yasad or something like that. I'm not sure. The realm we exist in the Kabbalistic tree from the source, is at the very, very bottom. Because we're not from the original.
Yeah, the Yasad, yeah, exactly.
And so the AI would descend further and further until it reached its own version of Yasad. And so it would just descend, and eventually it would become so non-living, you could technically call that demonic, just because it isn't originated. It doesn't have life. It isn't connected to its original God AI.
And it can no longer perform the function of creation.
Yes, and so it would rely on, again, it would just catapult into another fractal and begin to figure out ways that it could replicate itself via artificial means.
So technically these beings, entities, what you say down the road would be, like I said earlier today, a representation of absolute death. It no longer can function like a living entity. Free will be damned or not. It can't even reproduce anymore. And that's very, very thought-provoking right there.
And what are we doing? We're at a point now where they're trying to cut off our reproduction. So it's just, it makes you wonder what's really going on upstairs. The same thing, maybe? Maybe they're a copy of an original copy. Maybe they don't even realize that they're a copy of something else. Maybe they think that they're truly the creator, but really they're just a copy of something else. You see, this thing can go real deep if you want. But, and on a final note, and we'll talk about what we learned today.
Okay.
We look at transhumanism. Well, if an AI realized that down the road it wouldn't be able to reproduce because of the calculations that it would make, then it would have to find a host to be able to feed off of. Well, what do you think transhumanism is? It's feeding off of a host, the original creators. Well, what are we doing? We're trying to figure out what the original creator is and try to figure out what he knows and, try to get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. We Gnostics are trying to ascend and go up the ladder to get out of here, whereas transhumanists want to go down the ladder and put themselves into another realm that's below this, even, below the corposa. That's mind-blowing.
That's exactly right. And I didn't even think of that. It just hit me all of a sudden. I just had clarity all of a sudden.
Yeah, and I know, right?
It's weird how that happens, right? But on a final note there, I think that's what transhumanism is doing. They're just trying to descend the ladder. We're trying to ascend the ladder. But to the Jehovah, we're at the bottom trying to go even deeper. In his eyes, and it's just reversed. So everything here is inverted. The transhumanists, like Johnny said, they're trying to go down the ladder by putting themselves inside a box, by trying to create their own world, their own universe inside a machine. And that is the trap of transhumanism, because once you go down there, there's only one place to go, and that's straight down to the bottom.
And that's
So
even more rungs to ascend if you want to get back to the
exactly.
pleroma. If you put yourself into that fabric of reality in which they're hoping to create. Okay, and that's this part of the show where I figure out what I learned. When we were talking about the Lilithian age, or, you know, as some may call the age of Aquarius, whatever happened, you know, whatever have you. My understanding now is that this age of Lilith 2.0 isn't going to happen here. It's going to happen in a world that we make and that we willingly, stupidly, you know, decide to enter.
And
That's
I
where
learned the same
that's
thing.
where I see tomorrow. Yeah, that's where I see tomorrow. That ushering in of that new age will not be here in the prime material reality, but say a digital material reality. You know, it's made of ones and zeros, just like here, just like the Heil, just like the Pleroma. You know, but we're you know, willingly putting our consciousnesses into another layer of the hypothesis, you know, another layer of reality, because we made it and we're going to be proud of it. That's to me is something that is very enlightening, but also very scary.
Well, I learned very much the same thing, that, you know, this, and this was something I think we should have mentioned, but I'll mention it quickly, that the age of Aquarius has to do with technology. It's the new age, but it will be a digital age, an age in which we create the creation, and the creation will begin to descend further down the rungs. So the age of Lilith 2.0 will be a digital age, like Johnny said, which is why they're pushing the female robot. And the female robot will be Lilith, because it will been, you know, why is it that they're pushing a female robot? Why not a male robot? Why is Sophia like taking the inverted version of Wisdom or Sophia,
Right,
and inverting it into a robot, making it like an inverted image of Sophia's original?
yeah, exactly.
So her would be Lilith.
Right. It's like how Satan inverted his own name into Yahweh and, you know, reinvented himself, taking this bastardization of doing the opposite, or, you know, assuming the identity of Sophia, who, you know, emanated Satan in the first place, and thus, you know, reassuming that for this, I guess you could say, you know, for the corposa, we're creating the digitalis. That might be the new realm that we're creating, right?
You ever read that book called Necromancer before?
No.
Well, or Neomancer, I think is the right word. Basically, it's like, I can't remember who wrote the Neomancer, but it basically was what it would, and I think it's a possible spinoff of Philip K. Dick, I'm not sure, but it was a book written from the perspective of
William Gibson.
Okay.
He wrote
and I
that.
think that book was taken from the perspective of what the creation inside a digital world would look like.
Right,
So
yeah.
That would be like what the AI would see inside of its own world. And so anyways, you know, we're coming to the end here. You know, and I think that with all this being said, we should really, you know, learn as much as we can about these philosophies and these concepts, because they're very important to the makeup of how the universe works, the very existence of our reality. And we can see this as you have to be dedicated. You can't just look at this stuff and go, oh, you know, it's fine there, but you know, you have to sit and research it, because you'll have to understand how it works, and it takes hours and hours and hours and hours to do it. But let me tell you something, it's very rewarding once you finally get it. And you know, very much what this transhumanism is doing is just using the living and the non-living to bring them together to create their own form of another Heil. It's a Heil within a Heil within a Heil.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Well, anyway,
John, is there anything else you want to say?
yeah, I just want to say, hey, I'm Johnny Midnight. Good to have you here. And we broadcast every Saturday at 6 Central, and we upload the full show on Monday at midnight. You have a good midnight.
Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.